Sometimes the ones who cut you deepest share your last name. Hey guys, tonight we witness a betrayal so quiet, so cunning it could have shattered anyone. A woman gives sacrifices and builds only to watch the very people she loves most take her for granted, then try to erase her. But what happens when the one they underestimated the most decides to rise? This is not just a story of revenge, it's about dignity, about boundaries, about reclaiming your voice without screaming. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here at Revenge Stories 94. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe pour a glass of wine, and let's step into tonight's story together. Hey guys, tonight we witness a betrayal so public, so cruel, it could have broken anyone. A spring evening in Santa Barbara, the kind you only see on postcards. The backyard sparkled with fairy lights. Champagne glasses clinked and cherry blossoms floated down like blessings from the sky. I sat at the long reception table in a pale blue dress I didn't choose, watching my younger sister glow in her lace gown. Sophie, the golden child, the artist, the bride. Across the table, my parents beamed, not at me, at her. Then it happened. My father rose for the speech. He tapped his glass gently with a fork, waiting for the hush to fall. Brandon, the new son-in-law, stood beside him looking like he belonged on the cover of GQ, arm around Sophie, like she was a prize he'd just earned. Tonight, my dad began, voice rich with pride, isn't just about giving away a daughter, it's about welcoming a son. I knew the speech was coming. I'd helped write part of it, or so I thought. But Cynthia and I continued motioning to my mother. We wanted to give Sophie and Brandon a proper start, a foundation. There was a pause. A silence so loaded I felt it in my throat. We've decided, he said, lifting his glass higher, to gift them our home. The family home, and applause, gasps, laughter. I didn't move, couldn't. The home. The house I'd been paying the mortgage on for 7 years, that house. My mother joined him at the mic, her tone syrupy sweet. Natalie, you already have your career, your beautiful cabin up in Big Bear. You've always been our independent one. Sophie needs this. And Brandon, he's such a wonderful addition to our family. I don't remember the next 5 minutes. Someone passed me champagne, someone else touched my shoulder. I think someone asked if I was crying happy tears. Happy graduation, indeed, I thought. Except the diploma was mine, the student loans were mine, and now the house I'd saved was someone else's wedding gift. Across the table, Brandon gave me a smile. Not smug exactly, but sure, like he'd won something. Sophie didn't look at me. She was still frozen in surprise, unless she was acting. I couldn't tell, didn't want to tell. And Mom, she sat back down and whispered loud enough for only me to hear, please don't make this about you. My fingers went cold. 7 years, won $200 a month, a new roof, an upgraded water heater, bathroom towels I handpicked, receipts, signed agreements, text messages, Saturday mornings spent at Lowe's, Sunday evenings driving back to San Jose with paint in my hair. The quiet sacrifices no one ever noticed because I never complained. And yet I didn't stand up. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I raised my glass, took a slow sip, and smiled like I'd just been handed a bouquet, not a betrayal. Because that's what you do when the hurt is too loud for words. You perform. Later during the first dance, Jake, my closest friend from Big Bear, touched my hand under the table. His eyes asked what his voice didn't. I nodded slightly. He understood. That night after the cake was cut and the lights had dimmed, I cornered my parents near the kitchen where the caterers were boxing leftovers. You're giving them the house, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dad sighed. It just made sense. It was never really your house, Mom added, as if I needed a history lesson. It's the family home, the one I've been paying for, kisses. You didn't buy it, Natalie, you just helped. No apology, no acknowledgement, just reframing the truth so it hurt less for them. And then, as if to twist the knife, she said it. Sophie's the one starting a family. You've got your little mountain retreat. Little mountain retreat. That cabin was my sanctuary, my escape from years of being everything to everyone. I bought it after years of budgeting, dreaming, and hustling through 80-hour work weeks and quarterly reports. It wasn't little, it was mine. The rest of the night, I stayed silent. I didn't speak during the bouquet toss. I didn't dance. I wrote my maid of honor speech inside my head, and never read it. But I promised myself one thing as I stood in that kitchen surrounded by dirty dishes and echoes of laughter that wasn't mine. They might have taken the house, but they would never take my peace. And this was not over. I wasn't always this calm, not always this still. There was a time when every small favor felt like a bond, a way to belong, to be seen. The first time my father cried in front of me, I was 31. He'd called late one night from their home in Fremont, voice cracking like a man far older than he was. "We're 3 months behind," he said. "On the mortgage, the bank, they're talking foreclosure." I remember staring at my spreadsheet. I was budgeting for a down payment on a small townhouse in San Jose. I'd been dreaming about it for years. No roommates, no shared walls, a space that echoed only my thoughts. Instead, I looked at those savings and said, "I'll cover it." And I did, for 7 years. I created a simple contract, nothing dramatic, just a clear agreement I'd take on the mortgage pay, one $200 monthly fund necessary repairs, and after 7 years, the house would transfer to my name. They could live there for life. I didn't want to kick them out. I just wanted something fair. My dad signed with relief. My mom signed with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You always need everything in writing, Natalie," she said, gently folding the paper. "You're so logical, it's almost cold." I wanted to laugh or cry, maybe both, because I didn't need everything in writing. I just knew they'd forget without it. Or worse, they'd remember only the parts that suited them. So I paid. Every month, like clockwork. And I didn't just send money, I rolled up sleeves. I chose tile patterns, fought with contractors, painted walls until my arms ached. I turned that tired 1980s split level into something worth loving again. Sophie would show up occasionally, usually barefoot and late, humming something she was writing for her acoustic pop face. She never stayed long. She said the house felt too structured. Mom would laugh. "She's got a wild spirit. Not everyone's wired like you, sweetheart." I wasn't sure what that meant. Wired like me, like the kind of daughter who stayed late at the DMV to help renew her dad's license. The one who remembered to pick up mom's medication when she forgot. The one who took every Sunday call, even when they only called to ask about Sophie. Wired like a backup generator, maybe. Useful in emergencies, quiet the rest of the time. When I bought the cabin in Big Bear, it wasn't to escape. Not really, it was to exhale, to sit in silence without someone asking, "Can you just—" It needed work, but I loved that about it. The pine walls, the chipped deck, the creaky stairs. No one had ever made demands of it. No one had ever said, "We assumed you'd give this to Sophie eventually." The first person I met there was Jake. He lived next door, well, next cabin over year-round. A wildlife photographer with soft eyes and worn-out boots. We met when I got stuck installing the dock, and he showed up with a wrench and an easy smile. He never asked what I did for a living. He didn't compare me to anyone. He listened, not just waited to talk, actually listened. When I told him I worked in finance, he just nodded. "I thought you might," he said. "You organize your tools like a hedge fund." We laughed. It was the first time in months I laughed without guilt. Jake once told me, "You don't owe people parts of yourself just because they ask nicely." I didn't believe him then, but I remembered that line as I stood at Sophie's wedding champagne, burning my throat, wondering how many parts of me I'd already given away. That week after the wedding, I started gathering documents, every check, every invoice, the signed agreement, the email threads about repairs. I created a digital folder, color-coded and dated, not to sue them, not yet, just to remind myself I wasn't imagining things, because the worst part of betrayal isn't the act. It's the denial that follows, the casual dismissal. "You were doing well financially. We never really meant for the house to be yours." Family shouldn't be about contracts. That one hit hardest. I thought about it as I packed for a solo weekend back at the cabin. I'd planned to repaint the kitchen, install new lighting, clear my head, but the second I pulled into the gravel driveway, I knew something was off. There were two cars parked outside. One was my father's. The lights were on inside. The front door was unlocked, and when I stepped in there, they were. Mom and Dad, suitcases open, groceries in the fridge, coats in the closet, as if they'd lived there forever. "Surprise," Mom said, like we were filming a sitcom. I stood frozen, key still in my hand. What are you doing here? I finally asked. Dad shrugged, holding up a key. Remember the spare you had made for the contractor last summer? We kept it, just in case. Just in case, what Mom stepped forward, brushing her hands together like she was settling in. This place is mostly empty, Natalie. And with everything we spent on Sophie's wedding, it just makes sense. Brandon thinks it's a smart, temporary fix. Brandon, of course, he always had ideas, always strategic. I set my bag down very slowly, let the rage pool in silence. They'd taken my home. Now they were trying to take my peace, and the worst part, they looked at me like I was the selfish one. I didn't say anything that night. Not when Mom asked where I kept the good tea. Not when Dad started folding his flannel shirts into the drawer I'd cleared for camping gear. Not even when I found my grandmother's quilt, the one she gave me in college, spread across the guest bed like it had always belonged there. Instead, I stepped onto the deck, looked out at the dark lake, and let the silence wrap around me. The pine trees didn't ask for explanations. The stars didn't demand apologies. I slept on the couch that night, not because there wasn't space, but because I couldn't imagine sharing a hallway with people who had recategorized me in their hearts. From daughter to backup plan. The next morning, I drove into town early, pretending I needed groceries. In reality, I needed space. I parked outside the cafe Jake liked, ordered 2 black coffees, and waited. He arrived 10 minutes later, camera bag slung over his shoulder, hair still damp from a morning hike. I didn't waste time. They're in my cabin, I said. Jake blinked. Your parents, I nodded. He sat back quietly, furious for me in the way only the best people can be. They didn't ask. No, I said. They used the spare key, called it logical, called it temporary. Jake exhaled. What are you going to do? I shook my head. I don't know. If I ask them to leave, I'm the cold one. The bad daughter, again. You're not, he said. But I get it. It's hard when the story they tell about you is louder than the truth. That line stuck with me. The story they tell about you. I'd been the capable one for so long, they'd forgotten I had limits. That my kindness wasn't bottomless. That the girl who always had it together just once wanted to be asked before her boundaries were crossed. When I returned to the cabin, Mom was rearranging my spice rack. Oh, good, she said cheerfully. You were out of turmeric. I added it to the list. I stood there holding both coffees, watching her touch my things like they were hers. We need to talk, I said. Dad joined us in the kitchen holding a folded hiking map. We thought we'd explore the trail behind the ridge today. You always said it was your favorite. They were acting like we were on vacation. I didn't raise my voice, didn't throw the coffees. I simply looked at them and said, This isn't a visit. This is a violation. Mom's smile faltered. Natalie. No, I said sharper now. You didn't ask. You didn't call. You just decided this was yours to use. We're your parents, she said quietly, as if that settled it. You're also the people who gave away the house I paid for. Without a word, I replied. So forgive me if I don't feel generous. Dad stepped forward. Let's not turn this into a list of grievances. It already is, I said. You just don't want to hear the items, sis. Then came the line that cracked something open. We were counting on you being you, Mom said softly, the one who always makes room. There it was. I was reliable, predictable, bendable. I was the daughter who sacrificed, not the one who needed. I didn't respond. I just walked past them into my room and closed the door. Not to sulk, to breathe. That evening, while they were out hiking, I opened my laptop and pulled up the contract again. 7 years of payments, renovation invoices, transfer agreements. I read every line, not as a daughter, but as a woman who needed to remind herself that she wasn't crazy, that her memory hadn't been rewritten. And then I made a call. Sophie answered on the second ring. Hey, she said, surprised. Is everything okay? No, I said honestly, but I need to ask you something. A long pause. Did you know about the agreement? The one where Mom and Dad promised me the house if I helped pay the mortgage. She was quiet. I could hear her breathing. Brandon said you'd helped out when they were in trouble, she said cautiously, but he made it sound like you were just being generous, like family does. And Mom and Dad, did they ever mention a transfer? No, they said it was their wedding gift to us. A surprise. My chest ached. Not with anger yet, but with that hollow kind of ache when someone you love reveals they were never paying attention. Would you have accepted the house, I asked, if you knew it wasn't really theirs to give? Another long silence. Finally, she whispered, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I believed her, even if part of me wished she'd asked more questions, looked closer, not assumed I was just a reliable machine set to support. But you do now, I said. She sounded smaller when she answered, yes, I do now. We didn't hang up angry. We didn't cry, but something shifted. Sophie wasn't the villain. She was just used to being chosen. And me, I was used to being useful. But useful is not the same as valued. And that distinction was about to change everything. Brandon always knew how to fill a room. Not with noise exactly, but with presence. He was the kind of man who made people lean in without realizing they had. Sharp suit, sharper smile. When he walked into my parents' living room the first time, he brought a bottle of wine and a compliment for everyone. Your house has such warm bones, he told my mother, letting his hand brush the door frame like it was a lover's cheek. Not many homes feel this lived in. Mom practically blushed. Dad took to him immediately. They watched baseball together, swapped opinions on patio upgrades and interest rates. It was like Brandon had slipped into a role they'd been saving all along, someone to connect with in a way I never quite could. Sophie, of course, was glowing. She'd always wanted a love story, and Brandon gave her a plotline, gallery dates, lakefront proposals, Instagram perfect weekends in Carmel. But I noticed things, like the way he subtly corrected her when she talked too long. You're going off on a tangent again, babe. Or how he always ordered for her at restaurants. She'll have the salmon. Right, Soph, little things. Things people excuse as preferences. But control rarely introduces itself loudly. It wears manners. It uses pet names. At first, I told myself I was overreacting, protective older sister syndrome, but then I heard him talking to my dad during one of those backyard barbecues I somehow always ended up co-hosting. I had gone inside for ice. They didn't see me through the screen door. She's a great resource, Brandon was saying, his voice smooth. Smart, calculated, but a bit rigid, you know. Always thinks 3 steps ahead. Dad chuckled. Natalie's always been that way, practical to a fault. Sometimes I wish she'd just relax, Brandon laughed. Well, she's got her career, her little getaway cabin. Sophie's the one who needs security. My little getaway, the house I poured weekends and salary into, the place I escaped to when the weight of holding everything together got too loud, that was little to him. Disposable, convenient. He saw me not as family, but as leverage. That conversation haunted me through the engagement period. Every time I visited my parents, Brandon was there making decisions, steering conversations, telling stories that always ended with him being right. When I raised concerns gently, carefully about budgeting for the wedding, he smiled and said, don't worry, I've got connections. His connections were always friends with luxury businesses, florists who charged double, venues that needed hefty deposits. Somehow my parents paid. They sold a piece of land up north I thought they'd hold on to forever. My mother stopped working. My father dipped into his retirement. But I was the one questioned when I didn't attend the third cake tasting. You can drive 2 hours to your cabin, but not 30 minutes for your sister's special day, Mom asked. I have work, I said. Deadlines. Well, she replied, voice tight. Brandon's mother flew in from Connecticut. It wasn't about cake. It was about positioning. I wasn't playing the part they wrote for me, the cheerleader sister, the selfless one, the one who has enough. So I became in their eyes the problem. I remember the week before the wedding when I finally voiced my unease. I pulled Dad aside after dinner while the others argued about centerpiece colors. Have you thought this through? I asked. About the house, he sighed. Natalie, we have a signed contract, I said. 7 years. The transfer's due next month. He looked away. Let's not get technical. It's your sister's wedding. I'm not getting technical. I'm getting factual. You always do that, he said, tired. Make everything about documents. And you always make everything about feelings, I shot back. But only the ones you like, he didn't answer. I returned to my seat, watched as Brandon charmed a neighbor into offering free photography and felt like a guest in a life I built. Then came the moment that snapped the final string. At a rehearsal dinner, Brandon stood to toast my parents. They've welcomed me like a son, he said. This house has been a haven for Sophie and me. We can't wait to start our future there." The guest clapped, my chest constricted. He said this house like it already belonged to him, as if all I'd poured in time, money, care was just prelude to his stage. I caught Sophie's eyes. She looked confused, maybe even a little anxious, but she said nothing. Later, when we were alone in the hallway, I asked her gently, "Does Brandon know I've been paying for the house?" She bit her lip. "He knows you helped, but he thinks family help doesn't come with strings." I nodded slowly. "And what do you think?" She hesitated. "I think I've never asked." That was the thing about Sophie. She never had to ask. Things were just given, and I had learned to only take what I could justify in writing. The air in Big Bear was thinner than usual that Thanksgiving week, not from altitude, but from the suffocation of being invaded. I'd returned to the cabin early, hoping to prepare a quiet meal with Jake. We'd planned something simple, a small turkey garlic mashed potatoes, maybe a bottle of wine. Nothing flashy, just stillness. Instead, I found my front door unlocked and my parents unpacking in the living room like seasonal decorations. Mom was already reorganizing my pantry. Dad was stretching on my yoga mat. It was surreal. "What are you doing here?" I asked again. Mom turned genuinely surprised at my question. "We told you, honey, just for the holiday. We thought it'd be lovely to be together like old times." Old times. As if the wound of them giving away the house had scabbed over in 2 weeks. As if my silence meant forgiveness. I stood in the doorway with the scent of pine and betrayal pressing on both sides of my chest. "And how long were you planning to stay?" I asked. Dad spoke first this time, just a bit. "Brandon thinks the real estate market will improve by spring. We'll be out before then." "Spring?" I echoed hollow. "That's 4 months. It's not like we're taking it from you," Mom offered. "Just borrowing a little space." But it wasn't just space, it was the only place that was still mine. I'd lost the house, I'd lost the narrative. Now I was losing the silence I built to keep myself whole. "You didn't even ask," I said. "If we had, would you have said yes?" she asked, looking at me like I was the selfish one. I didn't answer. Jake arrived shortly after holding a bag of the groceries and whistling some song from the 80s. When he saw their car out front, he paused, looked at me, and then knocked on my own door. Inside, he said nothing, just registered the energy, the clutter, the unspoken tension. Dad sized him up instantly. "This is a family matter, young man," he said, as if I'd brought a lawyer instead of a man I cared about. But Jake didn't flinch. He glanced at me, waited. And I said the words I never thought I'd say to the people who raised me. "This is my cabin, and Jake is my family. If you're staying here, you're staying with both of us or not at all." Silence, then the laughter, dry and shocked from my mother's throat. "You would put your own parents out on Thanksgiving weekend." I folded my arms. "You put yourselves out the day you gave away what I paid for and tried to take the only thing I had left." Dad's voice sharpened. "After everything we've done for you." I raised an eyebrow. "Like what raised me to believe that boundaries are optional if you love someone?" That landed. "You don't mean that," Mom said. "You're just overwhelmed." "No, I'm just clear." Jake stepped in. "There's a hotel 20 minutes down the road. I know the owner. I'll call ahead." Dad opened his mouth, but for once said nothing. They started packing, muttering to each other about my coldness and entitlement. The irony so thick it curled like smoke in the cabin walls. When Dad reached for a box in the kitchen, one labeled Grandma's dishes, I stepped between him and the shelf. "Leave them," I said. "They were your grandmother's," Mom said, suddenly defensive. "Yes," I replied, "and she left them to me in her will. I have the papers if you need them." Another silence, this one heavier. They finished packing in under an hour. Jake loaded their suitcases into the back of their car without a word. As they pulled away, I stood at the edge of the driveway in my socks, the gravel biting my feet, watching them go with no final wave, just the hum of the engine fading into pine-scented air. I didn't cry, I didn't shake, I just breathed. The cabin was quiet again, mine again, even if it was still echoing from all the things that had been said. Later that night, Jake made tea, while I curled on the couch in a sweater that still smelled like old paint and cedar. He sat beside me, warm and patient. "They're going to tell everyone I was cruel," I said. "Soft, Lethe. They'll say I locked them out." Jake shrugged. "Let them. People believe the version they're closest to, but and now you've chosen yourself. I thought about that, chosen myself. It sounded selfish, but it felt like oxygen. A few hours later, my phone buzzed, a message from Sophie. Mom and Dad just called me crying from a hotel. What is going on? I stared at the screen, fingers motionless. Then I typed back one line: call me tomorrow. I'll tell you everything. And for the first time in years, I went to bed without wondering if I was being too much or not enough. Just enough for me. Sophie called the next morning, voice tight with tension. I don't understand what happened, she said, skipping pleasantries. They're saying you kicked them out, that they have nowhere to go, that you've changed. I took a slow breath, watching sunlight filter through the tall windows of the cabin. My coffee had gone cold, but I hadn't moved to warm it. There was too much weight in this conversation. They broke into my home, I said, evenly, used a spare key without asking, brought suitcases, stocked the fridge, put their coats in my closet like they lived here. A silence stretched between us. I thought, I didn't realize it was like that, Sophie murmured. They made it sound like a misunderstanding. Of course they did. She hesitated. And the house, the contract, I closed my eyes for a second. I signed a formal agreement with them 7 years ago. I paid every mortgage payment. I funded renovations. They promised me that house. Then at your wedding, they handed it to you and Brandon like a door prize. Sophie's breath hitched. I didn't know about the contract, she said, her voice quieter now. Brandon mentioned something vague, said you'd helped out during tough times, but it wasn't a big deal, that it wasn't formal, it was a signed document, I said. With terms, timelines. I have everything saved: payments, emails, renovation receipts. Another pause. I could hear her moving, maybe walking through a hallway. Oh, God, she said finally. Emily, I'm so sorry. I'd waited so long to hear those words. But they landed with a kind of softness I hadn't expected, like a salve, not a victory. I believe you, I said, that you didn't know. But now that you do, I need you to understand what this was. They didn't just give away a house, they erased my work, my trust, my place in the family. There was no malice in my voice, just bone-deep exhaustion. Sophie started to cry. I feel so stupid. I thought they were doing something kind. I didn't know they were rewriting history, I offered. She nodded through the phone. I remember when you put in that new bathroom, she said. You used your vacation days. You even grouted the tile yourself. I smiled faintly. It took me 2 weekends and a lot of YouTube tutorials. We sat in silence for a moment, two sisters, one phone call, and years of unspoken imbalance unraveling between us. Then she said something that pulled my spine straighter. Brandon thinks they should come live with us until things settle. My blood ran cold. He said what he thinks since we have the house now, it's only fair. I could practically see him saying it. Casual, reasonable, strategic. Sophie, has Brandon ever asked you how you feel about that A-beat? No, not really. He just kind of decides, then tells me why it makes sense. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Sophie kept going as if now that the floodgates had opened, she couldn't stop. He's been different since the wedding, she confessed. At first I thought it was stress, but he's controlling Natalie about everything. The grocery list, my clothes, even who I see. He got angry when I bought watercolor paper last week. Said it wasn't in the budget. Her voice cracked. It was $12. $12. I felt something inside me coil tight. Sophie, I said gently, do you want to talk to someone? A therapist, a lawyer, I don't know, she whispered. I just know I don't want to feel like this anymore. We sat with that truth together. After we hung up, I called Jake and told him everything. He listened without interruption, nodding as I sping his presence like an anchor. She's starting to see it, I said. Not just what happened to me, what's happening to her. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Maybe this mess broke something open for both of you. Later that afternoon, I sent an email to my old college friend Samantha, who now worked as a family law attorney. Attached were PDF, the contract, the payment ledger, photos of renovations, scanned invoices, emails confirming agreements. She responded that evening. This is airtight. They violated a binding contract. We can send a formal demand letter, propose partial restitution. It's enforceable. I stared at her message for a long time. I didn't want to sue my parents. but I also didn't want to keep paying the cost of their betrayal in silence. The next day, the letter was sent via certified mail. It was calm, professional, firm. It requested compensation for 60% of the money I had spent, roughly $75,000. No threats, just facts. The response came swiftly. A call from Dad. "You're really doing this," he snapped. "You're threatening us." "I'm holding you accountable," I said. "You always were the cold one," he muttered. "It's why no one comes to you for comfort." And there it was, the story they told about me, reliable, distant, cold, because I didn't fall apart. Because I didn't make demands until now, I let him rant. Then I said, "If you want to respond, speak to my attorney." He hung up. An hour later, Mom left a voicemail. "We never intended to hurt you. We just thought you could absorb the loss better than Sophie." I didn't reply, because that message wasn't for me, it was for the daughter they expected me to be. And that woman, she no longer lived here. The fallout came in waves. First, it was the voicemails my father sharp and clipped my mother's tearful and measured. Then came the extended family. Aunt Lorraine called to say I was breaking Mom's heart. Uncle David emailed to suggest I think about the long-term consequences of taking legal action against Blood. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I forwarded everything to Samantha. "This isn't about punishment," I told her. "It's about acknowledgement. I need it in writing that I wasn't just some helpful bystander in my own family." She nodded during our call, her voice low and empathetic. Then we keep going. 3 weeks after sending the demand letter, their attorney replied with a counteroffer, $35,000, as a gesture of goodwill with no admission of wrongdoing. I sat with that number. It wasn't fair, not even close, but I wasn't doing this for fairness anymore. I was doing it for closure. I accepted, not because I'd lost the fight, but because I'd already won something bigger, clarity. That check arrived in a plain envelope. I deposited it into my investment account and quietly donated $10,000 of it to a housing nonprofit that helped women over 40 secure stable living spaces after divorce or financial hardship. I knew what it meant to lose ground that took years to build. Meanwhile, Sophie called more often, not just about Brandon, but about herself. "I found him going through Mom and Dad's bank statements," she said one evening. "He said he was checking on their financial health, but I don't know. It felt invasive." "Have they given him access to their accounts?" I asked. "I think so. Mom mentioned he helped set up a joint family fund." My stomach turned. "What does he say when you question him?" Sophie hesitated. "He tells me I don't understand business, that I should focus on making our home beautiful, not messy with worry energy." There it was again, control wrapped in velvet. I wanted to tell her to run, to pack a bag and drive away like I did, but that wouldn't have worked. Sophie needed to find the edge of the cliff on her own, and she did sooner than I expected. One Thursday morning, she called me from her car, whispering fast. I found the account, the one Brandon's been moving money into. I sat upright. "How much?" I asked. $3,000 a month since we got married," she said. "It adds up to over $20,000. And I found emails he's talking to a real estate investor about flipping the house." "Our family home," I said. Her voice cracked. "He was planning to sell it after renovating. I think he married me for it." I closed my eyes, feeling rage pulse in my temples. "What do you want to do, a beat?" Then Sophie answered with the kind of certainty I hadn't heard from her in years. "I want out." In the days that followed, we worked quietly. I connected her with one of Samantha's colleagues, a lawyer who specialized in financial abuse and coercive control. Sophie gathered evidence, backed up emails, made copies of statements, changed passwords. She waited for a weekend Brandon was traveling and packed the essentials. Then she drove 3 hours to my apartment in Oakland. Jake and I were ready. We'd already spoken to the building security. I gave her the spare bedroom and stocked the fridge with things she used to love. Frozen raspberries, oat milk, the cereal she swore by in college. When she arrived, she looked smaller than I remembered, paler, but her spine was straight, her hands didn't shake. "I almost didn't leave," she admitted, standing in my doorway with her bags at her feet. His voice was in my head the whole time, telling me I was overreacting, that I couldn't survive without him. I reached for her suitcase. "You just proved him wrong." Over the next few weeks, the story unfolded further. Brandon's financial trail revealed a pattern: previous relationships with sudden breakups. After large purchases, business partners who disappeared, whispered allegations of fraud. Sophie's lawyer built a case so strong that even our parents couldn't ignore it. And when they finally saw the documentation, screenshots, transfers, assigned emails, they stopped calling me ungrateful. In fact, they stopped calling altogether. Until one morning, Dad left a voicemail. We may have misjudged things, not an apology, but a crack in the wall. Sophie, meanwhile, flourished in slow, quiet ways. She started therapy. She painted again, first small things, lemons, leaves, faces in profile, then bolder pieces, abstracts and shades of defiance. She sold 2 of them within a month. One afternoon, as we sat drinking tea, she turned to me and said, "You were the only one who told me no, the only one who didn't tell me to be happy or grateful or quiet, and I used to hate you for it." I smiled. And now, she took a sip and looked out the window. Now I think, I want to be more like you. She didn't mean I was perfect. She meant I didn't disappear when people told me to. Neither did she. Not anymore. Spring arrived in Big Bear the way it always did, softly. Snow melted from the roof in lazy drips. Pines breathed again, and the lake, once frozen in silence, shimmered with motion. Jake and I spent the weekend airing out the cabin, shaking out rugs, resealing the dock. But everything felt different this year. Not because the seasons had changed, but because I had. Sophie was visiting for the first time since she left Brandon. She brought a sketchbook and new hiking boots. The first night she fell asleep on the couch with a cup of chamomile still warm in her hands, and the peaceful curve of her back reminded me of the little girl I used to read bedtime stories to. As the fire crackled beside us, Jake poured me a glass of wine and smiled. "You know what impresses me most?" I raised an eyebrow. He leaned in. "You didn't let it break you. You stood your ground and still left room for healing." I hadn't thought of it that way. Not until then. Because for months I'd carried the guilt of saying no, of drawing a line and watching the people I loved fall on the other side of it. I'd asked myself 100 times, was I too harsh, too cold, too logical? But here was the truth: that cabin, the one they called my little mountain retreat, had become something much bigger. Not just a boundary, a home, not just a shelter, a reclamation. I didn't win anything back by fighting. I found something new by refusing to be erased. 6 months after Sophie's divorce was finalized, she stood with me on the dock in the golden haze of evening. Jake was inside cooking dinner, music playing low from the kitchen window. "I think I'm ready to sell the house," Sophie said, her voice steady. I turned to her, surprised. "You don't have to," I said. "You won. You get to keep it." She shook her head. "There are too many ghosts in those walls. Too many lies I didn't see. I want a place where the floorboards don't whisper someone else's story." I nodded. "You deserve that." She hesitated. "If I sell, I'd like to split the proceeds with you." I blinked. "Sfino, I want to," she interrupted gently. "You paid for it. You made it livable. They gave it to me with your work still in the walls. I don't want to build something new on a debt unpaid." Her words were a balm, a restoration, but I placed my hand over hers and shook my head. "Use it to build your own life," I said. "That's worth more to me than the money." She didn't argue, just squeezed my hand, and together we stood the lake folding around us like a mirror. Later that summer, my parents moved into a modest senior apartment community outside Sacramento. They'd stopped making demands, stopped rewriting the past. We spoke only occasionally neutral topics, weather updates on their health. They never apologized for the house, never asked to return to the cabin. But there was a gentleness in their voices now, like they were tiptoeing around what they finally understood. I didn't push for more. Some truths arrive late, and some people can only whisper regret, not name it outright. One Sunday, Mom visited me in Oakland. Sophie was there too, organizing paints for a local gallery opening. As Mom helped me seal wedding invitations, mine and Jake's, she paused mid-fold. "I never thanked you for taking Sophie in," she said. "You were there when we failed her." I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I handed her another envelope and said, "She's my sister. I always will be." Mom nodded, eyes glassy. Then she whispered something I didn't expect. "You're a better person than we raised you to be, Natalie." I looked at her not with anger, but with understanding. "Maybe we all learn in different ways," I said. Some of us through joy, some of us through pain. The wedding was small, just friends' chosen family and the lake. Jake and I stood on the new wraparound deck he'd built with his own hands. Sophie painted the welcome sign. The same stars that had once watched me sob on this dock now blinked down as witnesses to something softer, truer. During the ceremony, as Jake held my hands, he said, "I don't vow to rescue you. I vow to walk beside you, in your silence, your fire, your stillness." I said I vow to never shrink for love again, to never be anyone's backup plan, and to build a home where we both get to breathe. Afterward, Sophie hugged me tight. "You know," she whispered, "Brandon always said you were cold." I smiled. He mistook clarity for coldness. Most people do. As we sipped champagne under lanterns and pine, I looked around the cabin and realized it no longer held the echo of betrayal. It held the sound of laughter, the smell of garlic bread and old books, the creak of new memories being made. I used to think revenge had to be loud, but the real victory was peace. That first morning as a wife, I folded laundry in the sun while Jake brewed coffee. No phone calls, no guilt, no invisible measuring stick of "have you done enough?" In the silence they left behind, I didn't just rebuild. I rose. It is never too late to be what you might have been. George Eliot. By the time Natalie folded that last piece of laundry in the soft morning sun, the revenge had already bloomed into something far greater, a quiet life on her own terms. You see, sometimes justice doesn't shout. It arrives on a breeze through the pine trees. It smells like fresh coffee. It looks like a woman who no longer needs to prove herself because she already knows her worth. And to you watching this now, if you've ever been the one left behind, the one underestimated, or the one used, let this be your reminder: peace can be your loudest comeback. If this story touched something deep in you, please comment below. Share your story. And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Stories Day. Your support is the reason I can keep creating these heartfelt stories, because sometimes healing starts not with a scream, but with a story told right to the heart.